It was Christmas Eve, and Matt was finally heading home from college for the holidays. The roads were quiet, the sky pitch black, and snow had been falling for hours without letting up. He'd waited until late to leave. He had to finish a last minute paper and pack up his things. By the time he got on the road, it was already past 10 p.m. He didn't like driving at night in the snow, but he knew the roads well. His parents lived in a quiet rural town outside Thunder Bay, Ontario. The main highway only got him so far before it turned into narrow back roads, two-lane stretches cutting through endless pine forests, the kind of roads with no gas stations, no lights, and no signs of life after dark. He'd made this trip dozens of times, but something about that night already felt different. The snow had started to fall heavier as he left the highway. Big, wet flakes hitting the windshield in clumps, turning the world outside into a blur of white and shadow. His windshield wipers worked overtime, and the tires crunched over ice patches here and there. The heater was on full blast, but he still felt a chill in his chest, not from the cold, but from something else. He turned the radio up to distract himself, but the signal began to crackle and break apart. Static faded in and out between fragments of songs and commercials. Then the screen on the dash flickered and went black. Just like that, no music, no sound. The silence inside the Jeep grew louder, and the only thing he could hear was the engine and the crunch of the tires beneath him. He checked his phone. No signal, no bars, no data. That didn't surprise him. Reception in the woods had always been spotty, but the timing felt too perfect. A little too on the nose, like something out of a bad horror movie. Still, he kept telling himself it was just a drive. Just a few more turns and he'd be home. That's when it happened. Something sprinted across the road. Fast. Too fast. Matt hit the brakes hard. The Jeep swerved, sliding across the slick pavement before coming to a stop sideways. He gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding, eyes wide. He hadn't hit it, whatever it was. His headlights pointed toward the edge of the trees now. For a second, there was nothing but snow and branches. Then he saw it. Something was standing between the trees. Not an animal. It was upright, thin, way too tall. Its skin was pale, almost white like the snow, and it didn't move. It just stood there, almost blending in with the forest. But the eyes were the part that froze Matt in place. They didn't reflect the light like an animal's would. They just stared at him, dark and unmoving. Matt blinked, wiped his eyes, trying to clear the windshield again. And when he looked back, it was gone. Just trees. Just snow. Like it had never been there. He exhaled sharply, trying to laugh it off. But his voice cracked. He told himself he was tired. That maybe it was just a weird tree branch or a trick of the headlights. He slowly pulled the Jeep forward and kept driving. But the forest didn't feel the same anymore. The trees felt closer. The shadows darker. The snow somehow quieter. It was as if something had changed, and the road didn't quite feel like the same road anymore. He tried to shake the feeling. It was late. He'd had too much caffeine. Maybe he was just on edge. But no matter how he tried to rationalize it, that image, the tall, pale figure watching him from the woods, stayed stuck in his mind. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing in the road behind him. But there was nothing. Just darkness and snow. Still, something didn't sit right. His stomach was tight. His hands clutched the steering wheel too hard, and a cold sweat was beginning to form under his jacket. That stretch of road had always been quiet, sure, but not this quiet. No cars, no signs, no snowplows. It was as if the world had just paused. He looked at his phone again. Still dead. No bars. The radio hadn't come back either. The only light came from his headlights, which barely cut through the thick snow swirling in the air. And then As he rounded the next bend, he saw something that made his heart skip. A faint red light flickering just beyond the trees on the right side of the road. Not a street light, not a car. It looked like it was coming from a lantern or maybe a porch light. As he got closer, he saw what looked like an old cabin, half buried in snow. One window was glowing red from inside, and standing outside the cabin at the edge of the driveway was a man. He wasn't wearing a coat. No gloves, just a flannel. Shirt, jeans, and boots. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, staring directly at the Jeep as it passed. Matt didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He just kept going, suddenly more awake than he'd been all day. There was no reason for someone to be standing out there in that weather. Not dressed like that. Not just staring. And as the cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror, Matt couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something out here was watching him. And it wasn't done yet. Matt's hands were tight on the steering wheel as he drove deeper into the woods, trying to convince himself there was nothing to worry about. But the image of the man outside the cabin wouldn't leave his mind. The way he stood still as a statue watching the Jeep pass without flinching, without even reacting to the freezing cold, was deeply wrong. Matt kept telling himself it was just some rural local, maybe someone eccentric or drunk. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the truth. There was something unnatural about that moment, something his brain couldn't quite explain. The snow started to fall harder now. Thick flakes clung to the windshield and blurred the view ahead. Even with the high beams on, he could barely see more than a few feet in front of the Jeep. The world outside was being swallowed by white. Every tree started to look the same. Every curve in the road felt unfamiliar. He should have been only 20 minutes from home at that point, but nothing looked right. There were no road signs, no turnoffs, no houses. Just endless forest and snow. His stomach began to twist again. The silence inside the Jeep was crushing. The radio was still dead, just a low static hum beneath everything. He reached down and turned it off completely. Even that small sound made him more anxious. The only thing he could hear now was the rumble of the engine and the soft, rhythmic hiss of the tires against the snowy pavement. He glanced at his phone. Again, still no service. The time blinked on the screen. 10:47 p.m. That couldn't be right. It felt like he'd been driving longer than that. But the clock hadn't moved much since he'd seen the man by the cabin. A few more minutes passed, and Matt finally saw something ahead. A faint red glow again, just off to the right side of the road, through the trees. He slowed the Jeep, squinting to make out what it was. His breath caught in his throat. It was the same cabin. The exact same one, same angle, same flickering red light in the window. And outside, standing in the same spot as before, was the same man. Matt hit the brakes, the Jeep sliding to a stop. He stared in disbelief. There was no way he'd turned around. He hadn't made a single turn since the last cabin. The road had been completely straight. He knew the area well enough to know that no identical houses existed out here. Not ones that old, that remote. Not with the same man standing in the same place. It didn't make any sense. Nothing made sense. The man didn't move. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just stared at the Jeep like he had before, as if he'd been waiting, as if he knew Matt would be back. But now, there was something different about his expression. His head was tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening closely to something distant, something hidden. Matt felt a cold ripple run through his chest. He glanced in the rearview mirror instinctively, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There were no tire tracks behind him. The snow was fresh, untouched, completely smooth. That was impossible. He'd been driving for over 30 minutes. The road should have been marked by his tires at the very least. But it was as if his Jeep had never passed through. like it had just dropped into this part of the road from nowhere. Matt stared at the mirror, heart hammering in his chest, then back at the man in the distance. He was still watching, still not blinking. The world around Matt suddenly felt too still, too quiet, like everything had stopped moving except for him and that figure by the cabin. His breathing became shallow. He didn't know whether to reverse or hit the gas. He considered turning around, but the thought of driving back toward that man or whatever he was made his skin crawl. He finally decided to push forward. He eased his foot onto the gas pedal, and the Jeep crept ahead through the falling snow. He kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the man slowly vanish behind him. The farther he drove, the more he hoped the road would finally shift, change, show him some sign that he was heading in the right direction. But the woods all looked the same. The snow was heavier now, almost suffocating. Then something even stranger happened. The forest grew. Quieter, not in the usual winter silence, but in a heavy, unnatural way. There was no wind, no branches moving, no sound of wildlife, just absolute stillness. It felt like the woods themselves were holding their breath. And then, in the middle of that oppressive silence, Matt felt something brush against the back of his neck. Not physically, but like the feeling of being watched intensely, up close, by something that wasn't human. He didn't dare look in the mirror again. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing forward, whispering under his breath that it was almost over. Just get home. Just get out of the forest. Just get through the night. But even as he drove, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe he hadn't been driving forward at all. Maybe he'd already passed the same point over and over. Maybe the road wasn't leading him home anymore. Maybe it was keeping him. Matt's hands were shaking as he gripped the wheel, his knuckles white against the leather. He didn't know what he was expecting, but the silence and cold pressing in from all sides made it feel like the Jeep was the only living thing left in the world. After what felt like another 10 minutes of driving, just when he thought he might be clear of the nightmare, something in his headlights made his heart plummet. There it was again, the same flickering red light, and as he got closer, he saw it was the same cabin. Same porch, same old wood siding half covered in snow. Same window glowing dim red like the coals of a dying fire. And standing in front of it, without a coat or even shoes, was the same man. Matt slammed the brakes and the Jeep skidded slightly before stopping on the icy road. His jaw tightened. His heart was beating so loud it drowned out everything else. He stared out the windshield, trying to rationalize what he was seeing, but there was no explanation. He hadn't turned, hadn't made a loop, hadn't stopped for even a second, and yet he was right back where he'd been earlier, like the road itself had betrayed him. The man was in the exact same spot, but something about him had changed. His posture was different now, rigid, unnatural, and his head was still tilted at that slight angle, like he was listening. Not to Matt, but to something else. Something behind Matt. A deep instinct kicked in, and Matt slowly turned his head toward the rearview mirror. At first, he saw only darkness. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he noticed something standing on the road behind his Jeep. At first, it didn't register, just a shape, faint, motionless. Then, as the brake lights softly glowed across the snow, he saw it more clearly. It wasn't the man. It wasn't any kind of person. It had the shape of something tall and thin, almost skeletal, with limbs too long and too uneven to be human. On its head were antlers, or something that looked like antlers, bent at unnatural angles. It didn't move. It just stood there, its body blending into the snowy forest, like it had been following him the entire time and had finally decided to show itself. Matt panicked. His breath caught in his throat as he shoved the gear into drive and hit the gas. The Jeep spun briefly before the tires gripped, launching him down the road. His heart pounded with each second, the road rushing toward him, the trees on either side blurring. He didn't look back again. He couldn't. He just kept going, desperate to see anything familiar, anything safe. That's when he saw the green road sign. Welcome to Thornhollow. Est. 1879. Matt blinked hard. He had lived in this area his whole life. He had driven these back roads countless times. He had never heard of Thornhollow. There was no such town. Not on any map, not in any story his parents told him, not in any GPS app. But there it was. The road led directly through it. He didn't slow down. He drove straight in, half hoping there would be someone he could ask for help. Someone real. The town was strange, silent, small, maybe only a dozen houses, all covered in snow. Each home had a candle in the window, glowing with the same kind of red light as the cabin. But there were no signs of life, no people walking around, no cars parked in the driveways, no Christmas lights, just the same old flickering candles. It felt like the place hadn't been touched by time, like it was stuck. Or abandoned. But not forgotten. The snow had let up slightly, but the sky was still pitch black, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something metallic, almost like rust. Matt drove slowly through the narrow street, scanning the houses for any sign of movement, but saw none. Then he noticed something at the edge of town, a tall church with white paint peeling from its sides. Its doors were open wide, and warm light spilled out into the snow-covered path. For a split second, Matt felt hope. Maybe someone was inside. Maybe it was a real place after all. But as he approached, something inside the doorway made his breath catch. A figure stood in the entrance. A woman. And not just any woman, it was his mom. She was wearing the exact same red and green sweater she had worn last Christmas. Her hair was the same, her expression soft and warm. She smiled at him like nothing. "Was wrong. Come in, honey," she said gently, her voice carrying through the cold air. "You're just in time for dinner." Matt froze. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even think. His mom was supposed to be home waiting for him, texting him every hour to see if he was close. She couldn't be here. And something about the way she stood there, perfectly still, that wide, unblinking smile frozen on her face, it didn't feel right. It didn't move right. And then, behind the smile, behind those familiar eyes, Matt saw something else. Something watching from inside. Something wearing her like a mask. Without another thought, he stepped on the gas and tore out of that place. He didn't look back. Not at the church. Not at the woman who wasn't his mother. Not at the thing in the road. Behind him. He just drove, pushing the Jeep faster than it was meant to go, praying that the road would finally lead him somewhere real, somewhere safe. But even as the town of Thornhollow disappeared behind him, the feeling didn't fade. The sense that something had followed him, that something still was. Matt didn't stop driving for miles. He didn't care about the speed, the icy roads, or the blinding snow. All he wanted was to be out of that forest, far away from the town that shouldn't exist, the figure wearing his mother's face, and the thing in the woods with the twisted antlers. His body trembled, every nerve on fire. His mind raced through every memory of the road, the people, the signs, but nothing added up. It was like he had slipped into a version of reality just a little too far off from the real one. Something about that place wasn't human. It was copying things he trusted, things it knew he'd follow. But it hadn't fooled him, at least not yet. Eventually, he passed a road he recognized. County Road 17. That was real. That was familiar. He practically shouted when he saw it. He turned onto it without hesitation, tires skidding on the packed snow. Within another 5 minutes, the forest began to thin out. He passed the rusted sign for Maple Ridge, his hometown. It was the first real thing he'd seen in over an hour. His hands loosened their grip on the wheel just slightly. When he finally pulled into his parents' driveway, it was past midnight. The house was quiet, the windows glowing soft yellow from the Christmas lights inside. There were no red candles, no weird figures outside, no static on the air. Just home, real, familiar home. His mom's SUV was parked out front. The porch light was on. It was normal. Everything was normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was too quiet. He sat in the Jeep for a few moments, staring at the front door. He didn't want to get out. Not yet. Not until he was sure. He texted his mom. Just pulled in. Coming inside now. A moment later, her reply came. Yay. I'll warm up some hot chocolate. Doors unlocked. That felt real. That sounded like her. He grabbed his bag and walked to the door, his boots crunching through the snow. When he stepped inside, the warmth hit him like a wall. The familiar scent of pine candles and cinnamon drifted through the house. There was soft Christmas music, playing from the Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. He turned the corner and there she was. His mom, standing at the stove, pouring hot chocolate into 2 mugs. She turned around, smiling. Hey, sweetheart, she said, walking over to hug him. You made it. He hugged her back tightly, burying his face into her shoulder. She was warm, real. She smelled like peppermint and wool. This was home. This was her. Nothing weird. Nothing wrong. Except when they sat down at the table and she handed him the mug, Matt noticed something. Her hands. They were shaking slightly, barely noticeable. But her smile didn't falter and her eyes didn't blink. He tried not to let it get to him. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was all in his head. They talked for a few minutes. She asked him about the drive and he told her parts of it, leaving out the cabin, the town, the figure in the woods. He didn't want her to think he'd lost it. He just said the snow was bad and the drive was long. She nodded and told him to rest soon, that breakfast would be ready early. But when he finally went upstairs to his room, something inside him still wouldn't calm down. He sat on the edge of his bed, his bag at his feet, and stared at the wall. Everything looked just how he left it. Posters, books, an old Christmas card from a friend pinned to the corkboard. And yet something felt off. That's when he remembered. The mirror. There was a full-length mirror on the back of his closet door. He stood and walked over slowly, his heart thudding. It was an old habit, something his dad taught him after he once freaked out watching a horror movie. If you're not sure it's real, his dad said, check the reflection. Mirrors. Don't lie. Matt used to laugh about it. But now, with the night he just had, it didn't seem funny anymore. He stood in front of the mirror. His reflection stared back, same clothes, same tired eyes, same haunted look. He let out a breath. Relief. Nothing strange. He turned slightly to glance over his shoulder, just the doorway to the hall. The faint sound of the TV from downstairs. All normal. Then he looked back at the mirror, and his reflection blinked. But he hadn't. His body locked in place. Eyes wide. He leaned forward slowly. His reflection smiled. A slow, cold smile that spread just a little too wide. Then it tilted its head slightly, just like the man outside the cabin had. That unnatural, listening tilt. Matt stumbled back, nearly tripping over his bag. The lights flickered. A sound came from downstairs, heavy footsteps, but not like walking, more like dragging. He rushed to the door and locked it, breathing hard. From the hallway, his mother's voice called up sweetly, almost sing-song. Everything okay, honey? You forgot your hot chocolate. He didn't answer. He backed away from the door, staring at it like it might vanish. The sound of footsteps on the stairs was slow and steady, not hurried, patient. Matt glanced back at the mirror. The reflection was gone. And from somewhere very close too. Close he heard his own voice whisper, "You should have stayed in Thorn Hollow."